In the scorching heat of the Arabian desert, where the sand burns like fire and survival depends on Allah's mercy alone, there lived a man who would become legendary, not for his wealth, but for his poverty, not for his power, but for his surrender, not for what he owned, but for what he gave away. This man possessed nothing in this world, yet he was richer than kings. His name was Ulba bin Zaid, and his story will shake your understanding of what true wealth really means. He was so poor that he owned only one piece of cloth to cover his body. Yet, when death approached a stranger, this fakir did something so extraordinary that the angels in heaven stopped to witness it. From which corner of the earth are you watching this blessed story? If you love Allah and seek to understand the mysteries of true generosity, subscribe to this channel and share this video with every believer you know, because what you are about to hear will transform how you see poverty, wealth, and the infinite mercy of our Creator. If you are ready to witness one of the most beautiful examples of selflessness in Islamic history, let us begin this journey together into the heart of a man who owned nothing yet gave everything. The year was during the blessed time of the Tienin, those righteous souls who followed the companions of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In the city of Basra, in what is now southern Iraq, the markets bustled with traders and the mosques echoed with the recitation of the Holy Quran. It was a time when the Islamic Empire was expanding rapidly, bringing wealth and prosperity to many cities. Gold flowed like water, merchants built grand houses, and the spoils of distant conquests filled the treasuries. Yet, in this same city, in a small, crumbling corner where few dared to venture, lived Ulba bin Zaid, a man whose entire worldly possessions could fit in his two hands. Ulba was known throughout Basra not for his wealth or status, but for his incredible devotion to Allah and his astonishing generosity, despite having almost nothing. He earned his daily bread by doing odd jobs, sometimes cleaning the mosque, sometimes helping merchants carry their goods, sometimes tending to the sick. Whatever small coins he earned, he would immediately share with others who had even less than him. He lived in a tiny room that barely protected him from the elements, and his only garment was a single patched robe that he had worn for years. Yet, those who knew him said his face always shone with contentment, and his lips were constantly moving in remembrance of Allah. The people of Basra often wondered about this strange man. How could someone who possessed so little be so generous? How could someone who struggled daily for his own survival care so deeply about the needs of others? Some thought he was simply foolish, giving away what little he had. Others believed there was something special about him, a secret they could not understand. But Ulba himself never spoke about his condition or complained about his poverty. When people asked him why he gave away his earnings instead of saving for himself, he would simply smile and say, "Allah is our Razak, the provider. He who feeds the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea will never forget his servant who trusts in him." This was the philosophy that guided Ulba's entire life. He believed with absolute certainty that Allah would provide for him exactly what he needed when he needed it. He had read in the Quran, "And it is he who feeds but is not fed," and this verse had penetrated so deeply into his heart that it became the foundation of how he lived. Every morning he would wake before dawn, perform his ablutions with the little water he had, and stand in prayer until the sun rose. In his prayers, he would thank Allah for whatever he had been given, no matter how small, and he would ask Allah to make him a means of benefit for others. One particular night during the month of Ramadan, as Ulba was returning from Isha prayer at the mosque, he noticed an old man sitting alone near the marketplace. The man appeared to be a traveler, with dust on his clothes and exhaustion written across his weathered face. His head was buried in his hands, and Ulba could hear quiet sobs coming from where he sat. The sight of this stranger's distress immediately moved Ulba's heart. Without hesitation, he approached the man and gently touched his shoulder. "Assalamu alaikum, my brother," Ola said softly. "I see that you are troubled. Is there anything this poor servant of Allah can do to help you?" The old man looked up with tears streaming down his face. His eyes were filled with a mixture of shame and desperation. "Walaikum assalam, brother," he replied. "I am a traveler from a distant land. I have been journeying for many days to reach this city, and I have lost all my provisions along the way. Bandits attacked our caravan 3 days ago and took everything we had. My companions and I scattered in different directions, and I do not know if they are alive or dead. I have not eaten in 2 days, and I have no money to buy food or find shelter. I was just praying to Allah to either provide for me or take my soul, because I cannot bear this hunger and helplessness any longer." Ola's heart broke as he listened to the stranger's story. He looked at this man, who appeared to be much older than himself, sitting in the dust of the marketplace, completely alone and abandoned in a foreign city. Without a moment's hesitation, Ola reached into his small pouch and pulled out the few copper coins that represented his earnings for the entire day. It was barely enough to buy a simple meal, but it was all he had in the world. "Here, take this," Ola said, placing the coins in the old man's trembling hands. "Use this to buy yourself some food and find a place to rest for the night." The stranger stared at the coins in amazement. "Brother, I cannot take this from you. You appear to be a poor man yourself. How can I take what little you have?" Ola smiled warmly and placed his hand on the man's shoulder. "My dear brother, these coins belong to Allah, and He has commanded me to share them with you. Allah says in His holy book, they give preference to others over themselves, even though they are in need. If you do not take this help, then who will I give it to? Allah will provide for me tomorrow, as He has provided for me today." The old man began to weep again, but this time his tears were tears of gratitude and relief. He took Ulba's hands and kissed them, saying, "May Allah reward you with the best of rewards, you generous soul. I will never forget your kindness." As Ulb watched the stranger walk away toward the marketplace to buy food, he felt a profound sense of peace in his heart. He had given away his last coins, and now he had no money for his own iftar meal the next evening, but he felt richer than the wealthiest merchants in the city. He returned to his small room and spent the rest of the night in prayer and remembrance of Allah, thanking Him for the opportunity to help a fellow human being. The next day was one of the most challenging of Ola's life. As the hours passed and the time for iftar approached, he had been unable to find any work or earn any money. He had searched the markets for odd jobs, offered to help merchants with their goods, and even volunteered to clean the mosque, but no opportunity had presented itself. As the call to Mr. Prayer echoed across the city and people began breaking their fast with dates and water, Ola sat in his room with nothing but water to drink. Yet, amazingly, he felt no regret about giving away his money the night before. Instead, he was filled with gratitude that Allah had chosen him to be the means of helping someone in desperate need. As Ola sat quietly reflecting on Allah's wisdom and reciting verses from the Quran, he heard a gentle knock at his door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see a young boy standing there with a small basket covered with a clean white cloth. The boy appeared to be nervous but determined. "Assalamu alaikum, Uncle Ola," the boy said respectfully. "My mother has sent me to give you this food. She said that you helped my grandfather last night when he was in great need, and she wants to thank you." Ola was puzzled. "Your grandfather? My son? I do not understand." The boy explained, "Last night, my grandfather was sitting in the marketplace hungry and alone. A kind man gave him money to buy food, and when he described this man to us, we realized it must have been you. My mother has cooked extra food for her, and she insists that you accept this as a gift from our family." Ulba's eyes filled with tears as he realized that Allah had already begun to provide for him in the most beautiful way. The stranger he had helped the night before had a family in this city, and they wanted to return his kindness. He accepted the food with deep gratitude and invited the boy to sit with him for a moment. "Tell your mother and grandfather that their kindness has touched my heart," Ola said, "and remind them that all provision comes from Allah alone. I was merely the tool that Allah used to help your grandfather, just as you and your family are now the tools Allah is using to help me." After the boy left, Ulba sat down to break his fast with the delicious food that had been sent to him. As he ate, he reflected on the perfect way Allah had arranged everything. He had given his last coins to a stranger in need, trusting completely in Allah's promise to provide, and Allah had sent that same stranger's family to provide for him in return. It was a beautiful example of how Allah works through His servants to take care of each other, creating an invisible network of mercy and support among believers. But this was only the beginning of Ulba's story. His reputation for generosity, despite his poverty, began to spread throughout Basra. People would come to him with their problems, not because he had wealth to share, but because they knew he would listen with a sincere heart and offer whatever help he could, even if it was just a prayer or kind words. Scholars began to seek his company, amazed by his contentment and trust in Allah, despite his material circumstances. Some of the wealthiest merchants in the city started coming to him for advice, recognizing that this poor man possessed a kind of wealth that money could never buy. One day, as Ulba was walking through the market, he overheard a conversation between two merchants. They were discussing a mutual friend who had fallen into severe debt and was about to lose his shop. The man owed a significant amount of money to his creditors, and if he could not pay within the next few days, his business would be seized, and he would be left with nothing to support his family. Although Ulba had never met this merchant personally, the story touched his heart deeply. He could not bear the thought of a family being left without means of survival. That evening, Ulba prayed earnestly to Allah, asking for guidance on how he might help this stranger. He knew that he had no money to offer, but he refused to accept that there was nothing he could do. The next morning, Ulba had an idea that seemed impossible, yet he felt strongly that Allah had placed it in his heart. He decided to go throughout the city and tell people about this merchant situation, asking each person to contribute whatever they could, no matter how small. He would become a collector of charity, pooling together the small contributions of many people to save one family from destitution. Ola spent the entire day walking from house to house, shop to shop, speaking with everyone he met about the merchant's plight. Some people gave him copper coins, others gave silver, and a few wealthy individuals gave gold. More importantly, many people who had no money to give offered prayers and kind words for the struggling family. By the end of the day, Ola had collected a substantial amount of money, more than enough to pay off the merchant's debts and save his business. When Ulba arrived at the merchant shop that evening and handed him the bag of collected money, the man could hardly believe what was happening. Through tears of gratitude, he asked, "Who are you, brother? Why have you helped me when we have never even met?" Ulba replied simply, "I am no one special, just a servant of Allah who believes that we are all responsible for taking care of each other. Allah says in the Quran, the believers in their mutual kindness, compassion and sympathy are just one body. When a limb suffers, the whole body responds to it with wakefulness and fever. Your suffering became my suffering, and helping you has healed something in my own heart." The merchant was so moved by Ulba's explanation that he asked if he could become his friend and student. From that day forward, this businessman, despite his wealth and status, would regularly visit Ulba's humble dwelling to learn from him about contentment, generosity, and trust in Allah. He later said that meeting Ola had taught him more about true wealth than all his years in business. As the months passed, stories of Ula's kindness continued to multiply throughout the city. There was the time he gave his only warm cloak to a shivering child on a cold winter night, even though it meant he himself would be cold. There was the day he worked extra hours to earn money specifically to buy medicine for an old woman who was too proud to ask for charity. There was the evening he invited a hungry dog to share his meager dinner, saying that all of Allah's creatures deserved compassion. But perhaps the most remarkable story of all occurred during one of the hottest summers in Basra's history. The city was suffering from a severe drought, and water had become scarce and expensive. Many people were struggling to find enough water for their basic needs, and the poor were suffering the most. Ola, like everyone else, had to walk long distances to find water and could only afford to buy small amounts. One scorching afternoon, as Ula was returning from the well with his small water container, he came across a scene that would test his generosity in the most extreme way. A woman was sitting by the roadside, holding her sick infant, who was clearly suffering from dehydration. The baby was crying weakly, and the mother was weeping as she tried to moisten the child's lips with tiny drops from her nearly empty water container. Ola immediately understood the situation. This mother and child were in desperate need of water, and they clearly had no money to buy more. The baby's life might depend on getting hydration quickly. Without hesitation, Ula approached the woman and offered her his entire container of water. "Please, sister," he said gently, "take this water for your child. Allah will provide for me." The woman looked up at him in amazement. She could see that he was clearly a poor man himself, and the water he was offering represented a significant sacrifice. "Brother, I cannot take your water. You need it for yourself in this heat." But Ulba insisted, placing the container in her hands. "Sister, listen to me carefully. I am a man alone, and if I am thirsty, only I will suffer. But you have a child whose life may depend on this water. How could I drink when I know that a mother and baby are in need? Take this water with my blessings, and may Allah heal your child quickly." The woman accepted the water with tears streaming down her face and immediately began giving small sips to her baby. As she watched her child's condition begin to improve, she prayed aloud for Allah to reward the generous stranger who had saved her baby's life. Ulba continued on his way home, now without any water for himself. The sun was still blazing overhead, and he could feel the thirst beginning to affect him, but in his heart he felt an incredible sense of peace and joy. He had potentially saved a child's life, and he knew that Allah would never abandon him for choosing to help others. As he walked, Ula began to feel dizzy from the heat and thirst. His mouth was dry, and his steps became unsteady. Just when he thought he might not be able to make it home, he heard someone calling his name. When he turned around, he saw a wealthy merchant running toward him with a large jug of cool water. "Brother Ola," the merchant called out, "I heard what you did for that woman and her baby. Please, you must drink this water immediately. I insist." It turned out that several people had witnessed Ulba's act of generosity, and word had spread quickly through the neighborhood about what he had done. This merchant, who had been looking for an opportunity to help someone in need, saw this as the perfect chance to do something good. He had quickly filled his finest jug with the coolest water he could find and came running to find Ola. As Ulba drank the refreshing water, he marveled once again at how Allah had provided for him exactly when he needed it most. He had given away his water to save a child, trusting that Allah would take care of him, and Allah had immediately sent someone else to provide for his needs. It was as if Allah was constantly arranging small miracles around him, rewarding his trust and generosity with his infinite mercy. The merchant who had brought him the water was so inspired by Ulba's example that he asked if he could walk with him and learn from him. As they walked together, the merchant said, "Brother Ulba, I have been wealthy all my life, but I have never felt the kind of satisfaction that I see in your face. Despite having so little, you seem to be the happiest man in Basra. What is your secret?" Ulba thought for a moment before answering. "My dear brother, the secret is very simple, but it is also very difficult for most people to understand. I have learned that true wealth is not in having many possessions, but in needing very few. I am content because I trust completely that Allah will give me exactly what I need, exactly when I need it. When I see someone else in need, I do not think about what I am losing by helping them. Instead, I think about what Allah might give me in return for trusting in His promise to provide." He continued, "You see, most people spend their lives trying to accumulate things because they are afraid of not having enough in the future. But I have learned that this fear is an illusion. Allah has never failed to provide for me, not once in my entire life. Sometimes His provision comes in ways I expect, and sometimes it comes in ways that surprise me, but it always comes. When you truly believe this, when you know it in your heart, and not just in your mind, then you become free, free to be generous, free to help others, free to live without the constant worry about tomorrow." The merchant was deeply moved by these words. He had spent years accumulating wealth out of fear that he might someday need it, but he had never thought about the freedom that could come from trusting completely in Allah's provision. He asked Ulba if he could continue to visit him and learn more about this way of living. From that day forward, this merchant became one of Ulba's closest friends and students. Despite the great difference in their economic circumstances, they would meet regularly to discuss the Quran, share meals, and reflect on the deeper meanings of wealth, poverty, and trust in Allah. The merchant later said that these conversations with Ulba had transformed his entire understanding of life and made him a much more generous and content person. As Ulba's reputation continued to spread, people began coming to Basra from distant cities just to meet him and learn from his example. And when you see a man who has more than you do you ever feel envious or inadequate? The host admitted that yes, he often felt both of those emotions. Ulba continued, "This is because you are comparing your situation with others, which is a trap that leads to either pride or envy. But I have learned to compare my situation only with what Allah has decreed for me. I do not look at what others have and wish I had the same. Instead, I look at what I have and thank Allah for His perfect wisdom in giving me exactly what He knows is best for me." When you truly believe that Allah's choice for you is better than your own choice for yourself, then comparison with others becomes meaningless. This particular teaching had a profound impact on many people who heard it. Several wealthy individuals later said that Ulba's words had freed them from the constant anxiety of trying to keep up with or surpass their neighbors in wealth and status. They learned to find contentment in what they had rather than always striving for more. As the end of Ulba's life approached, the entire city of Basra began to prepare for the loss of this remarkable man. People from all walks of life, rich and poor, scholar and merchant, young and old, all came to visit him and express their gratitude for how he had touched their lives. Many said that knowing him had changed their entire understanding of what it meant to be wealthy, generous, and truly successful in life. During his final days, Ulba was too weak to receive many visitors, but those who were able to see him reported that he remained peaceful and grateful until the very end. He would spend most of his time in remembrance of Allah, reciting verses from the Quran and praying for all the people he had known throughout his life. Even as his body grew weak, his spirit seemed to grow stronger and more luminous. On his deathbed, surrounded by a few close friends, Ulba shared his final words of wisdom. "My beloved friends," he whispered, "I want you to know that I have lived the richest life any man could ask for, not because of what I owned, but because of what I was able to give, not because of what I accumulated, but because of what I was able to share. Allah gave me the greatest gift possible. He made me a means of benefit for his other servants. What more could any human being ask for?" He continued, "Promise me that you will remember this truth. Every act of generosity, no matter how small, creates ripples of blessing that spread far beyond what we can see. Every time you choose to help another person, you are participating in Allah's mercy and becoming a partner in His infinite kindness. Do not let your circumstances, whether rich or poor, prevent you from being generous. The widow's mite is worth more in Allah's sight than the wealthy man's surplus." With these words, Ulba bin Zaid peacefully returned to his Lord, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations of believers. His death was mourned by thousands of people, from the poorest beggars to the wealthiest merchants, all of whom had been touched in some way by his extraordinary example of generosity and trust in Allah. The funeral prayer for Ulba was attended by more people than any funeral in Basra's history. As his simple wooden coffin was carried to the cemetery, people lined the streets to pay their respects to this man who had owned nothing but had given everything. Many wept openly, not just for the loss of a friend, but for the realization that they had witnessed something truly rare in this world, a human being who had perfectly embodied the Quranic ideal of preferring others over oneself. After Ulba's burial, several remarkable things happened that the people of Basra took as signs of his acceptance by Allah. That very night, multiple people reported having dreams in which they saw Ulba in paradise, dressed in beautiful garments and surrounded by light. In these dreams, he appeared young and healthy again, and he was smiling with the same gentle contentment that had characterized him in life. More significantly, the charitable fund that had been established in his honor continued to grow and expand, helping more and more families each year. The merchants who had established the fund reported that their own businesses seemed to be blessed with unusual success, which they attributed to the barakah of following Ulba's example of generosity. They often said that giving away wealth in Ulba's memory had actually increased their own prosperity in mysterious ways. Perhaps most remarkably, many people who had known Ulba began to change their own lives to follow his example. Some wealthy individuals dramatically simplified their lifestyles and increased their charitable giving. Some poor people found new contentment in their circumstances and began helping others despite their own limited resources. The entire culture of Basra seemed to shift toward greater generosity and mutual support. Years later, when Islamic historians began collecting the stories of the great saints and righteous people of early Islam, the story of Ulba bin Zaid was preserved and transmitted to future generations. His life became a teaching example used by scholars to illustrate the Quranic principle that those who believe and do righteous deeds, no fear shall they have, nor shall they grieve. The scholars noted that Ulba's story perfectly demonstrated several key Islamic teachings. First, it showed how complete trust in Allah's provision could free a person from the anxiety and selfishness that typically accompany poverty. Second, it illustrated how true generosity is not dependent on having great wealth, but on having a heart that recognizes the needs of others. Third, it proved that Allah always provides for those who provide for others, though His provision may come in unexpected forms. Most importantly, Ulba's life demonstrated the profound truth that real wealth is not measured by what one possesses, but by what one is willing to give away. His story challenged the common assumption that only the wealthy can afford to be generous, showing instead that generosity is a choice available to every human being, regardless of their economic circumstances. The story of Ulba bin Zaid continues to inspire Muslims around the world today. In mosques and Islamic schools, teachers share his example to help students understand that Islam values the purity of intention over the size of the gift. They explain that in Allah's sight, the poor person who gives from their need is more praiseworthy than the wealthy person who gives from their surplus. Modern scholars often point to story when discussing the Islamic concept of ihsan, or excellence in worship and character. They note that his complete trust in Allah's provision and his unwavering commitment to helping others represent the highest levels of spiritual development. His life shows that poverty, when accepted with gratitude and faced with generosity, can actually become a path to spiritual wealth. The lessons from Ulba's life are particularly relevant in our modern world, where material success is often seen as the primary measure of a person's worth. His story challenges us to reconsider our definitions of wealth, success, and security. It asks us to examine whether we are hoarding resources out of fear or sharing them out of trust in Allah's promise to provide. Perhaps most powerfully, Ulba's story demonstrates that every human being, regardless of their economic status, has something valuable to offer others. Even when he had no money to give, he offered his time, his prayers, his kind words, and his sincere concern for others' welfare. His life proves that generosity is ultimately about the heart, not the wallet. As we reflect on this remarkable man's life, we are reminded of the Prophet's words, "Peace be upon him. Allah will continue to help his servant as long as the servant helps his brother." Ulba lived this teaching every day of his life. And in return, Allah blessed him with a richness of spirit that no amount of material wealth could provide. His story calls each of us to examine our own lives and ask ourselves, are we living with the same trust in Allah's provision? Are we as quick to help others as we are to seek help for ourselves? Are we finding contentment in what we have, or are we always anxious for more? The answers to these questions may determine whether we live with the poverty of constant want or the wealth of complete trust in our Creator's infinite mercy. In the end, Ulba bin Zaid achieved something that few people ever accomplish. He found perfect peace in this world while preparing perfectly for the next. His poverty became his wealth, his giving became his receiving, and his trust in Allah became his security. May Allah grant us all the wisdom to follow his example and the courage to live with the same generous heart and trusting spirit that made him truly one of the richest men who ever lived.